Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
Rick.
Yeah?
It was a good day Monday afternoon.
Why is that?
Monday night. I don't know. They claim the dynasty was dead. But, you know, Cam Newton is a New England Patriot now.
Now, before everybody clicks off this video because it's two Patriots fans gloating, I'm just going to say we're happy it's not Stidham.
Are you sure? I was excited. No, I wasn't.
I know. I was kind of excited to see Stidham, too. I'm not going to lie.
Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Morgan Colby. I got Rick Lemon with me as always. We've got some stuff to get to in this episode. News, wide receiver rankings, all that good stuff. The news won't be long, but, you know, it is what it is. Be sure to check out our website at thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter at TheFFChamps, on Instagram at TheFantasyChampions. Like us at Facebook.com/TheFantasyChampions. Subscribe wherever you listen to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. If you're on YouTube, click the bell for notifications. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and then share this whole entire podcast with your friends. Please do that because it helps the brand. We also wanted to mention the draft guide. Holy smokes, tomorrow it is being launched. You can order the guide at $25. It launches tomorrow at noon time, Eastern Standard Time, because that's where everyone lives. By
everyone, you mean me and you.
Yeah. What is in this little package that you get for your drafts? Our full rankings, our breakouts, our busts. You get some player draft values, player breakdowns, and so much more. The entire staff was involved. The entire team was involved in this draft guide. So a lot of good content. I would not recommend purchasing it if I didn't believe in it myself. I will use this whole entire freaking guide for my own draft because
I will too.
It's all my research. So
I absolutely will.
But yeah, so if you like any of our writers, exclusive articles in there, you know, purchase the guide, $25. We are keeping it the same price after the deadline. So it's not going to go up to $35. It's staying at $25. So you're good. You can get it. If you pre-order now, you will be entered in for a chance to be entered into our listener league. So, I mean, you're going to be in a league where you can try to beat us. You're going to get a ton of really good content for only $25. I mean, that's 3 trips to Starbucks nowadays.
No, that's like one, dude. It's like 2 coffees.
What are you buying at Starbucks? So be sure to tell your friends about that.
Whatever the girl wants.
Let's get to the news. So Adam Schefter reported on Monday, I believe it was, that the Patriots were fined $1.1 million and that they were going to lose a 2020 third-round pick for filming the Bengals sideline. I don't know if you remember that when that happened. But that doesn't matter because it's subsequently followed up by Cam Newton signing with the New England Patriots for a 1-year contract. Oh, I've waited 2 days almost. I don't know, 2 full days to talk about this because I needed to get it off my, get my minds or my thoughts together on what I thought about this signing. But you know what? We need to drink to this.
Oh my gosh, I don't have anything, so I'm going to drink my water bottle.
I'm not going to open this on the show because, that would be a disaster. But Cam Newton is a New England Patriot.
Hell yeah. For us Patriots fans, hell yeah.
I didn't think I was going to be this excited, but I'm pretty freaking excited.
I think it's because
I'm going to tape out this 2 down here and just have it be a 1.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, dude.
Don't do that.
So yeah, he signed an incentive-laden contract with the New England Patriots. I think it's 7.5 is the base.
Yeah.
So Newton signs.
I think it's less than that is the base.
Yeah.
I don't know actually.
So finally, New England makes a decision on a quarterback. Did I not say this? I feel like I said this months ago that New England was going to wait as long as they possibly could to get him as cheap as possible. and have a really good quarterback. I mean, this guy, what was it, 4 years ago, was MVP of the entire league?
Oh, yeah.
5 years ago?
If he has anything left, he's going to be a stud.
With the Patriots, they went undefeated in the first half of the season last year. Sure, the schedule was easy, but you add Cam Newton, who is arguably one of the better quarterbacks in the league when healthy, to a team who already has a very good defense and some great offensive pieces. I mean,
it's pieces that can fit around Cam Newton. It's a run style offense.
Yeah.
What are your initial thoughts, fantasy wise, for Cam Newton?
So,
where would you rank him?
Such a tough question. I believe I updated my ranking system at 17.
Okay.
That's where, and I projected him at 11. So, I think obviously there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the injury.
Sure.
Liz Frank injuries aren't Liz Frank foot injuries are not the greatest to recover from, but
definitely
Cam Newton, he's a running quarterback, so you obviously are a mobile quarterback, and so you obviously have that as a problem. And he came out and said straight up last year that the foot problem was the reason why he had no throwing power or range of motion, and it wasn't his shoulder. So he claims his shoulder is fine, and it was all the foot, and he's been working on that. So that's the good news. For me, I think, with the injury, you have to be tempered in your excitement. I love Cam Newton. One of the first things, because what drives me nuts about the fantasy football community sometimes is that it's all about jumping out and getting the first take and not about figuring out what you're actually thinking. Like, people run out and they start typing up little articles and freaking out about and panicking about their opinion. And it's like, you don't even have an opinion yet. You can't have an opinion that fast. You have to let it set in your mind first.
Nah, bro, dude, I saw Cam Newton sign and I said, he's QB1, bro.
So the first thing I thought was, is there a reality where Cam Newton was brought in as and I can't remember who tweeted this, but they said it was a flyer. Cam Newton's brought in as a flyer to see if he's healthy enough to play, and he's going to be part of a QB competition with Hoyer and Jarrett Stidham, and that there's a chance.
It's going to be just Newton and Stidham. Hoyer's not going to be a part of that.
Hoyer signed with us because he thought he had a chance. So horrible. Anyway, so between Stidham and Newton, is there a chance that Jarrett Stidham can overtake Cam Newton for that starting job? Obviously, there's always a chance of that happening.
Yeah.
But if he is on the team week one, Cam Newton, at first I was like, oh, maybe they just brought him in to be a backup, because he literally said 3 weeks ago that he would be a backup.
Right.
He's like, I'm willing to be a backup. So what is the plan the New England Patriots have for him?
No.
The initial expectation is that Cam Newton's going to start. But for me, that's the big question that I've been trying to figure out.
If Cam Newton is healthy, he's not going to lose the job to Stidham, I don't think.
He won't lose the job, but where are the Patriots' heads at?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair argument.
I'm not saying that's going to happen. I have Cam Newton projected to start the full season, by the way. So we'll get to the fantasy impact in a second, but because I was supposed to answer your question, but I think go ahead.
I think they brought in Newton to either start or they're going to cut him. I don't really see a reality where he's the
backup. Okay.
He said he would take any backup job. I think that's just partly PR. So that, because I think he was open to, if the Seahawks offered him a contract, I think he would have taken that, or the Steelers or someone like that.
Yeah.
But with New England, I think it's pretty much he's either going to be healthy and he's going to start, or there's something, his foot's just unfixable and they're going to cut him and they're going to just run with Stidham. Because I think Bill does still like Stidham.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a 1-year deal. It's perfect for both sides. It allows Cam Newton to show that he's still healthy and still has it. He can go get the bag in the offseason, and then Stidham has 2 years of being under Josh McDaniels in the playbook and Bill Belichick.
Figuring himself out, yeah.
They can play him next year.
So that's a fair point. So it took me at least a few hours to try to figure out if the Patriots were going to start Cam Newton, which sounds stupid, like you would assume. But then watching the New England Patriots for as many years as I have, you don't assume anything. So, I do think, I agree with you. I think Cam Newton obviously is going to be the starter for the Pats week one, which is why I projected him to do so. I think the biggest problem with Newton to New England is going to be, obviously, I think his health is the first main thing. And the second thing is they waited a long time to bring him in. And in an offseason where, the online team activities and all of that extra stuff with coronavirus, it's going to make it difficult for the Patriots to cater their entire offense around Cam Newton. So we're going to have to see how that works. I mean, they're used to doing stuff like that. Figuring out the strengths and the weaknesses of a player and exploiting them on the field, right? And trying to make sure the strengths are shown on the field. So they'll figure it out with Cam Newton, but it's just they now have to kind of change unless they knew all along that they were going to sign Cam Newton and they were just waiting. They have to now switch their entire offensive scheme into Cam Newton.
Don't you think McDaniels loves that, though? I mean, he coached Tim Tebow.
Of course he does. He freaking loves it.
It's just going to be an upgrade over
I'm
Tim
totally
Tebow
fine with that. But as far as fantasy is concerned, I saw this stat the other day, and I preached this last offseason. Every year Cam Newton has played in the NFL, and he's played all 16 games, he has never finished outside of the top 5. And so playing with the New England Patriots, one of the best teams in the NFL, right? Regardless of whether I'm a fan or not, you have to recognize that if Cam Newton is healthy and he's on the field for 16 games, that he could very well finish as a top 5 quarterback this year. And I'm not saying he will, which is why I have him ranked 17. And I'm not saying he's going to miss time. But he has a high ceiling. If he wins that job in New England or he doesn't get cut, there's a very high ceiling for Cam Newton to be able to perform at a high level. And you're probably going to, once the hype passes on him in the next month or so, and you start to enter that post-hype area, he starts to become, I would think, going off the board probably in this 14th, 15th round. But then you're going to have people who are just freaking crazy. I hate that we're in a league with a bunch of Pats fans. It's the worst.
Yeah. So
Cam Newton's going to go off the board in freaking 8th round.
I know. All bias aside, we usually stay away from Patriot players.
Yeah.
I mean, when was the last time either of us had a Patriots player in one
last year? Julian Edelman.
Okay. Well, typically, you usually
lost
don't.
Me
I don't think
I've
owned a Patriot player since I had Gronk. So it's not just like we're Patriots fans, but I think Cam Newton is kind of a good fit for New England. I mean, he is a good fit, not kind of. He is a good fit for New England. And if he stays healthy, like you said, his rushing ability and that upside is just through the roof. And I can honestly see him getting a lot of goal line touchdowns with New England and them going in a good situation. I mean, we see New England's goal line offense all the time. It's usually very run heavy, which will only benefit Cam Newton because that could mean a lot of QB sneaks and rushing touchdowns for him. I have Cam Newton ranked 14th.
Okay. I might move him up. My first initial rank was 17.
Yeah.
And like I said, I have him projected at 290. The biggest thing with the projections is that it was so hard because I think I have him at 3,400 passing yards and 24 touchdowns, and which is normal Cam Newton. But then I put him at I think it was 22 touchdowns actually, but passing touchdowns. But the biggest thing with Cam Newton and what makes him really good is that over a 16 game pace, the guy rushes it. And he doesn't just rush; he's a highly efficient rusher as well. So it's he'll rush it 100 times and he'll do 5 yards a carry. So he's going to get 500 to 550 rushing yards if he plays the whole season, and he might actually hit 6 or 7 touchdowns, similar to how Josh Allen does it. So, it doesn't really matter if he reaches 3,700 yards and 28 touchdowns, through the air. It just really matters if Cam Newton is able to get.
It's going to be very similar to Josh Allen.
So it's exciting to see Cam Newton. Now, I do think this does have negative impacts on, and people are going to think I'm crazy. It does not have negative impacts on Sony Michel. This actually helps Sony Michel out a lot. Sony Michel continues to be a little bit of a quiet sleeper this year, and it's so gross. But you know what?
Same with James White. I think this helps James White a lot too.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you because Cam Newton threw to Christian McCaffrey for 2 years. So, like, I don't think it's a bad thing. We have to see how the Patriots utilize James White with Cam Newton. That's the thing for me is, like, I mean, if they utilize him the same way that the Panthers utilize Christian McCaffrey through the year, then you can expect good things possibly from James White this year. But that's only in a PPR format. I don't think there's going to be massive things for James White. There have been years where he's finished as a low-end RB1. I think he did in 2018. So it's not a bad play, but it's not, like I said, the Sony Michel, James White thing is not sexy, but I think Sony Michel is very, like, locked in.
This does bring Sony up a little bit for me from where I had him. Just
because of the scoring impact. Like,
who are you down on?
Julian Edelman, N'Keal Harry, and Mohamed Sanu. Sanu's worthless, but in fantasy, in real life, he's valuable. But yeah, as far as, like, you can take Sanu and put him off to the side, and the tight ends and put him off to the side. I think for me, the question is, does N'Keal Harry have the rookie breakout season or not rookie breakout season, but a breakout season that some people have pegged him at, or does he have a much better, like, is he the DJ Chark of this year? You know what I mean? Where he has a terrible rookie season, then comes out in his second year and performs well. Looking at Cam Newton and his numbers through the air when he was in Carolina, I don't know if it changes in New England. I highly doubt it. He's never thrown over 525 pass attempts. So, like, I don't know if Cam Newton can reach that point of being able to, get past 3,700 yards and, maybe 28 touchdowns, because he's never thrown over 26 touchdowns either. So it's like, I just think that kind of hinders the Patriots receiving core a little bit in terms of production fantasy wise. Which I would agree
with you, except for N'Keal Harry, because Cam Newton's history is he likes the bigger wide receivers.
Okay.
And he's always had Calvin Benjamin, Devin Funchess. Like he typically likes.
But those guys just weren't great fantasy wise.
No, they weren't. But for Carolina, they were the team's number one receivers statistically as well. Yeah. So I'm not saying N'Keal Harry is going to be great fantasy wise, but he might be better with Cam Newton actually than Jarrett Stidham.
He might. I mean, I don't like. We don't know what Jarrett. We don't know what Jarrett Stidham. What they want to utilize Jarrett Stidham for. In terms of strengths and weaknesses.
Brady, just a little bit more mobile. Like the offense would have been similar.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't disagree with you that Cam Newton will target N'Keal Harry. Like, he was very fond of Curtis Samuel when he was there too, and so Julian will get targets. Yeah. But I was just looking at the target shares, and, like, if you're going to throw it to the running back 80 to 90 times next year, and you only throw it 500 times, that's literally, a fifth of all the team's targets right there. And then you're talking about Sony getting 20 targets and, maybe Burkhead getting 20 targets, right? So it's like, that's just how the Patriot system works. So now you're talking about, like, almost, maybe a quarter of the team's targets going to the running back position. It's
probably going to be like 70 to 80 targets to tight ends too.
Yeah. And so it's like, and then you start trying to separate it out a little bit. And it's just like I have Julian at 116 targets and, like, N'Keal Harry at 105. And it's like, there's just not enough there to be able to spread it out.
They'll do that.
Right. So I mean, it's hard to kind of spread out, we spent 18 minutes on Cam Newton to the Patriots, but, it's hard to spread it out. You know what I mean? And when you do, you kind of notice that there's going to be a hit. Like, I think the only guy that might have, you might be right on the N'Keal Harry thing. And like, I'm not saying Julian's going to have a bad year, but he might. But I really do look at N'Keal Harry, and I think, he is bigger. He's going to be the red zone target for Cam Newton. But I think the real only massive fantasy option for the New England Patriots is probably Cam Newton at this point.
Yeah.
He's going to freaking throw it. He's going to run it. He's going to do everything. So we'll have to see what happens there. I hope he stays. I'm freaking excited. Like, if you're just a football fan,
I can tell you're excited, especially as a Patriots fan. But as a
football fan, like, you should, I know you hate the Pats, but you should totally be on board with this. Like, Cam Newton deserves a place in this league.
Yeah. I mean, we've been saying that for months as well.
Like, I just wanted somebody to sign him because he's so fun to watch. Like, he was, not Lamar Jackson, but he was Josh Allen and Kyler Murray and all them before they were there. You know what I mean? And he's so, like, when you look at his numbers and what he used to do, he's so talented. Like, he's ridiculously talented. And it's like, people just don't really remember that stuff because the NFL is what it is.
No, I mean, and his ability to run the ball too. And people forget, like, he's never really had any help around him on offense either. Like he had
besides McCaffrey, but McCaffrey
last 2 years. But yeah, I mean McCaffrey, peak McCaffrey was last season, and Cam Newton was injured, and then he had a rookie DJ Moore. He had a young Curtis Samuel. Mm-hmm. That was his best receiving core. But before that, it was always like Ted Ginn and Calvin Benjamin and Devin Funchess was all his best wide receivers in the past. So he's not, I mean, he had Steve Smith, but it was a very old Steve Smith, and it was a rookie Cam Newton. And so Cam Newton in his throwing prime has never really had any great receivers. And I don't know if he will in New England, but I would rather have Sanu, Edelman, and N'Keal Harry than Ted Ginn, Calvin Benjamin, and Devin Funchess.
Yeah. And on a complete side note, when the Cam Newton news broke, there were, many different reactions, and a prominent person in the fantasy football community tweeted that the Patriots have the worst receiving core in all of football. Would you agree with that, or?
I'd have to look again, but they're not. I mean, they don't have a great receiving core by any means, but I don't think it's the worst.
I think people have just written off N'Keal Harry, because if Jules is there and N'Keal Harry, it ends up being really good. And then you have Mohamed Sanu. Like, that team actually has a good receiving core. Like, if N'Keal Harry works out. If he doesn't, then it's a 30-year-old wide receiver and Mohamed Sanu who they wasted a second-round pick on. You know what I mean? But if it all really predicates itself on N'Keal Harry having success.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, like, I'm just looking at teams right now, and I'd probably say the Ravens have a worse receiving core. Hollywood Brown's great, but the Bears have a worse receiving core. Again, Allen Robinson's good, but after that, Anthony Miller. So there are a couple teams here that I think have. I mean, the Packers I think have a worse receiving core than the Patriots. You can make the argument the Colts have a worse receiving core. You can make the argument the Jaguars have a worse receiving core. So there's plenty of teams going through the list here.
I think you're extremely overreaching when you make a statement like that. You know what I mean? Especially when you're talking like people want the Pats to lose so badly.
It's not a great receiving core though by any means.
It's not great, but it's like at least like it's at least like 20.
Yeah, it's probably around 20.
God. Anyway, so let's talk about some wide receivers, because that's what we're here for on this program. I want to keep it brief with each one of these guys and not spend an hour on wide receivers, because I love wide receiver rankings.
Because we agree with some of these guys too.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about between 12 to 14 guys. We'll see what happens, just because we have some major differences at the bottom of the list. But we'll start off with the number one guy for both of us, and it's Michael Thomas. When I was statting, because I'm so excited to release this draft guide so people can see my freaking what I statted people out to do. And so Michael Thomas, this season, I have him getting 137 receptions. I think also 174 targets, which is I think
how many receptions?
137 receptions on 174 targets. Now, 174 targets is like, I think 10 less than last year. I could be wrong, but it might be less. So anyway,
you have him.
But no, I mean, if you look at Michael Thomas's,
he had 149 catches last year.
When you look at Michael Thomas's career and just year by year catch rate, it's absurd. And I was like, when I punched in 175 targets, I was like, that's normal for Michael Thomas, right? And then I had to punch in a conservative completion. I mean, catch rate, and I went on the low end, and he still had 137 receptions. And I'm like, I'm not gonna stat him out at his worst, you know what I mean, year catching the football. So it's like, it just doesn't make sense to do that. So right now, I think his schedule is like middle of the pack, and I was just like, let's just go in the middle. 137 receptions is where I came up with 1,500 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. And so I regressed him a little bit in the touchdown category, I believe, and then a little bit in the yardage area. But he still comes away with 282 fantasy points. And I think for him, it's not necessarily that Michael Thomas is the best receiver in the NFL or the most talented receiver in the NFL. It's that Michael Thomas is the most targeted receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think he might. He's up there for one of the best receivers in the NFL, though. I mean, it's a debate. For me, I actually had Michael Thomas. I went even lower for projected targets with Emmanuel Sanders there, and he still finishes the wide receiver 1 for me. So
you could take
here.
20 targets off mine, and he'd still finish as the wide receiver 1.
I mean, he was so good last year, and Drew Brees is still there. So.
I hate to have a guy who repeats. Because it generally doesn't happen, and that's the toughest thing. But
that is kind of tough.
You just know he's going to get targeted
if he doesn't repeat. But at the very if he plays a full season, I don't see a world where he finishes outside the top 5 or 6 receivers.
I don't see a world where he finishes outside of the top 2.
1. Yeah, I mean,
he is as much a lock in the first round at wide receiver. If you're taking a guy there, if you're taking a wide receiver in the first round, he's as much of a lock as you can get.
He has only missed 1 game in his whole career, so it's not like he's injury prone. So yeah. I mean, there's not much argument here with Michael Thomas, number 1.
Let's talk about the number 2 guy. I'll talk about the number 2 guy on my list, and then we'll talk about your number 2 guy in a second. So my number 2 guy is Tyreek Hill, and you have him at number 4. So I want to know why you have him at number 4, but let me just start with saying why I have him at number 2. So I projected him at 239 at a statistical draw with Devontae Adams on 131 targets. He has 12 touchdowns, 1,252 yards in my projections, and only 85 receptions. So all of his fantasy points are coming off of touchdowns at this point. I think I have him leading the league in touchdowns next year.
Oh, wow.
So just, he's in the Patrick Mahomes offense. What can you say? I was trying to get Mahomes to 40 touchdowns. But anyway, so Tyreek Hill comes in at number 2. I think the big thing for Hill, the big thing about Hill for me is that it's his explosiveness. It's his ability to create and essentially score at anywhere on the field. And obviously we know what Tyreek Hill is, and we know how he performs and what he does and all that stuff. And it's hard for me to even have him at 2 with his 131 targets. You know what I mean? How little the Chiefs throw the football actually in real life when you look at it on paper is absurd. And it's just because of how highly efficient that entire offense works. They don't have to throw the football as often as people think because they're able to score a lot faster. They could throw the ball 3 times to Tyreek Hill and have a touchdown. Simple, But the reason why I have him number 2 is I think he's probably the most explosive receiver on this list. And by explosive, I mean with fantasy point totals in games. He might have a week where he has 7 fantasy points, but he has several league-winning, not league-winning, but several game-winning weeks in him, where he just scores 30 fantasy points and wins you a week in that context. And so one of the things that I like about Tyreek Hill is that you can have a consistent wide receiver at your wide receiver 2, a guy like, Adam Thielen or, maybe a guy like Chris Godwin. You're probably not going to be able to get Godwin and Hill on the same team, but you get the picture. If you have a more consistent wide receiver in your second slot, and then you have Tyreek Hill in your first slot, Hill can have those explosive games, and then you get you're going to get 15 fantasy points from your second wide receiver if you draft properly. So it's I would rather have a consistent wide receiver 2 and explosive wide receiver 1 than have it the other way around. And so for me, I think with Tyreek Hill, if he gets even a little more target share, he could encroach Michael Thomas on this list at number 1. And I think he just hasn't had that. It depends on how much the Chiefs end up throwing the ball next year, whether it's more or less. He's going to be right around 130 targets. But if he hits 150, he's going to be absolutely absurd next year. So that's why I have him at number 2.
Yeah, I mean, it's all fair arguments. I think Tyreek Hill could easily be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy, especially if Mahomes has a year like he did 2 years ago when he won the MVP. I don't know if he's going to throw for 40-plus touchdowns. I have him projected at 36.
Yeah.
If he does throw for 40, I think did you have him at 40 or 38?
Let me look.
Because, if Mahomes does throw for 40 touchdowns, I think Tyreek Hill will probably
38. I got him at 38.
Yeah. So, it's debatable. Hill is definitely in the conversation with some of the guys that we're going to talk about as well, though. Like, they're all kind of in the same tier for me. And he definitely has like the week to week explosion. The only reason I don't have him ranked in my top 3 is because he's not going to get the same amount of targets as the other few guys that we're going to talk about as my number 2 and number 3 guy.
And that's fair.
And those guys are going to get like 20, 30, even 40, maybe even 40 more targets than Tyreek Hill. You have him projected at like 130 targets. I have him at 125 targets. So I feel like he's probably going to be in that range.
That's fair.
Which is still really good with his type of explosion. And potentially touchdowns. Like, if he gets double-digit touchdowns, he might end up being a top 3 wide receiver for sure in fantasy. He might even be number 2 or number 1, depending on how many he gets. So he's a guy who has a lot of upside and is a big play guy, but I just couldn't rank him ahead of those other guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Let's talk about number 3 on my list and number 2 on your list, Davante Adams, who's very close. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I think Adams may encroach Tyreek Hill on. I think one of the reasons why I have Tyreek Hill at 2 as well is because I think the discussion for me is Julio is 4. I think it's just because of age and the fact that he doesn't score touchdowns. That's why I'll keep him at 4. He's consistent, but I think it's between Tyreek Hill and Davante Adams between 2 and 3, and I might move Adams ahead of Hill. But the thing about Davante Adams that I don't like is that Rodgers is obviously going to target him a lot, but Rodgers is also old, and we have him as a bust, I think, this year. So it ends up being. I don't think it's going to end up meaning good things for Davante Adams, and he's coming off a foot injury, so. I mean, for me, I'll roll with Tyreek Hill at this point, but that could completely change. So anyway, Davante Adams comes in at 3 for me, 2 for you. I have him at 165 targets next year, which is pretty normal, spot on normal for Davante Adams. He has 109 receptions, 1,307 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns on the season. So I think for me, obviously with Davante Adams, it's all about opportunity. And last year he got hurt and he had that foot injury and all that stuff happened. So it prevented him from obviously finishing in the top of wide receivers for fantasy football, but he was still very good when he was on the field. The Packers really didn't change anything offensively or, in the receiver core besides adding Devin Funchess. So Davante Adams is going to get targeted 160 times again for sure. And I think with the amount of efficiency that he can have, he's about as safe of a top 3 wide receiver as you can get. So I'll stick with Davante Adams in this conversation. Like, if I'm on the board and Davante Adams is there and there's no running backs, I'll take him.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on Aaron Rodgers. I'm actually even lower on Aaron Rodgers than you yet. I think Davante Adams can easily take Michael Thomas' spot and be the number 1 receiver in fantasy this year. You look at the receiving core in Green Bay, they did not do anything. They did add Devin Funchess. A lot of people expected them to draft somebody, especially one of those big guys at the top in first round or top of the second round. They did not. They didn't draft anybody. Right now, the receiving core is probably after Davante Adams. It's somewhere like Alan Lazard and Devin Funchess are the only 2 other really guys that's going to get a lot of targets.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Graham left. They don't really have a tight end. They have Jace. I hope I say his name right. Jace Sternberger.
Jace Sternberger.
It's Jace Sternberger. Yeah.
Something like that.
He's probably
there's no
not
one
going to
there.
get more than like 40 targets, to be honest. So there's
he might get targeted 180 times.
I have Davante Adams at 175 targets this year.
Yeah.
I think
wow.
Like, that's very realistic. He could get a very similar season to what Michael Thomas did last year.
Yeah.
I think Davante Adams can do that this year.
Right.
Even if Aaron Rodgers doesn't have the biggest season, he's going to just force the ball to Adams a lot.
Big time. All right, let's move on to the next guy, unless you had anything else to say on Adams.
No, that's fine.
Julio Jones, I have at number 4. You have Julio Jones at number 3. I think it's clear to me that Julio is starting to fall off a little bit. I've waited for so long. Not like fall off. And people are going to be like, oh my God, what are you talking about? I still have him ranked 4 people. I have him at 234 fantasy points next year. He's still going to get targeted a crap ton. The thing I love about Julio Jones is the floor. You know what I mean? And it's the every single week he gets 10 targets. Every single week he comes down with 7 of those passes. Every single week he has 100 receiving yards. You know, and it's like he is always between 15 to 20 fantasy points. And then when he scores, it's a big week, right? And so that's what I love about Julio is the high floor on a week-to-week basis. He doesn't bust generally ever. So I think for me, when you talk about Julio, he's a safe pick. He's more of like he's not going to, do you think he's going to score 12 touchdowns, 10 touchdowns this year?
Probably not.
Yeah, I have him at 6. Where do you have him?
I have to look it up. I think I have him at 6 too, actually, off the top of my head.
Julio is just never, for some reason, he doesn't hit pay dirt ever.
Yeah, I have him at 6.
It's like you've owned him for a long time, like in a lot of leagues, and he does not score.
No, he does not.
So I like the consistency. And that's why I think like with Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, like I have all 3 of those guys scoring 9 or more touchdowns. Whereas I have Julio with 6 touchdowns, but he still has the second most receiving yards in all of the leagues. So that's why he's at number 4 on my list. So it's like he's going to get 100 receptions. He's going to get over 1,400 yards, right? I mean, that to me is almost a lock. The question is receiving touchdowns. At the low end, if he gets 6, he's, 4 or 5 or 6, next year, and he finishes at that point, probably around 3 or 4. If he gets to 10 or 12 touchdowns, then you can start talking about him,
the wide receiver 1.
Possibly being the wide receiver 1 next to Michael Thomas. And that is, maybe like off a couple points and half PPR, obviously, but I think he could be the number 2. But I think that ceiling is what you can draft for. But you're also looking at Julio, and how old is he? Like 28?
Julio?
Yeah.
Ooh, he's like 30, dude. He's
is he?
30,
yeah. So he's getting a little bit older.
He's 31 years old.
The shelf life for wide receivers is a little bit longer. But for Julio, he's old.
I mean, he is old. There is no doubt about it. But you look at last 2 seasons. 2018, he had 170 targets. Last year, he missed a game, and he still had 157 targets.
Yeah.
So he was on pace for like 160 plus. One interesting stat that I came across while doing research for our draft guide for Julio Jones. Did you know over the last 5 seasons, so since 2015, he has not finished outside of the top 6 for wide receivers every single year he's in the top 6 at least. And I believe he's been in the top 5 for those 5 years. So he consistently every single year is a top 5, top 6 fantasy wide receiver.
That's crazy.
So if you're drafting Julio, you're going to get at least a wide receiver 1. There's no risk involved really whatsoever. The only risk at this point in Julio's career is just him falling off a cliff and not being a good football player anymore because of age.
Yeah.
But really, other than that, if you draft Julio, you know what you're going to get. And also with Austin Hooper gone, and Mohamed Sanu gone for a full season as well, there's actually targets to be had in that offense.
Yeah. I don't think he'll get any more.
No.
Like if they go anywhere, it'll probably be Calvin Ridley and Hayden Hurst.
It at least assures that he's still going to get 160 targets.
True. Very true. And when you're talking about Julio Jones, like right now, he's averaging the 6th wide receiver off the board at pick 13. So, as a 2nd round pick, Julio Jones, yes, like if he doesn't get hurt next season, like you're talking about, like you said, the 160 plus targets, like I'm on board with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Let's talk about the next wide receiver on our list. And it's Chris Godwin. I have him number 5. You got him number 6, right?
Yeah.
Godwin, initially when I first started thinking about the 2020 season for Chris Godwin, I was like, this man's can't keep up with the pace. And I was gonna project him to fall a little bit off and end up being the wide receiver 8 or 9, kind of where Mike Evans always ends. And that he wasn't going to produce, especially with Jameis Winston, he wasn't going to produce at the same level he did, I think, last year. Let me pull it up. But I think last year he had over 140 targets, I want to say.
Godwin, I believe you were correct.
He had
memory serves.
He had 119 targets. In 14 games. So he would have finished.
He would have
finished
at least
around 136. So he was close. Yeah. I was thinking about prorated numbers, but anyway, So for Chris Godwin, I think, you could see a similar total to what Julian Edelman had with New England. Just considering that Tom Brady is now the quarterback, which is why I'm not fading Chris Godwin anymore, because Tom Brady loves his slot receivers and his intermediate routes. Last year, Mr. Edelman had 154 targets, which was number 3 in the entire NFL. And I think that you could see Godwin start to encroach that total of 150 targets next year, which, if you're talking about like what he did last year on 119 targets, was very good, right? Yeah. And what he can do with, 130, 140, 150 targets is going to be even better. And so right now I have 145 targets, 100 catches, 1,300 yards, and 8 touchdowns, which is number 5 in my projections. So I think he has a chance, especially with Tom Brady as his quarterback, who loves to throw it to slot receivers. He has a chance to, I think, supersede Julio Jones and be that number 4 guy, number 3 guy possibly, and get back into that conversation of being a top 3 receiver next year. I don't think it happens. I think he ends up 5 or 6, but I think in an offense where you're the slot receiver and Tom Brady's the quarterback, you're going to get 140 targets next year. And I think that's why I have Godwin so high, is just he might regress a little bit, statistically, because the schedule is harder. But I think that you're going to see Chris Godwin also take a step forward in terms of opportunity. And if that happens, it'll kind of wipe out the regression, and he'll end up probably around the same fantasy point output that he had last year.
Yeah, I really like Chris Godwin too. I'm probably going to own him in a lot of leagues if he's there. Brady does favor the slot guy, as you said, and Godwin kind of burst onto the scene last year. I think he's at a good breakout age. He's 24, so yeah. He's entering the prime of his career for receivers, his 4th year. Mm-hmm. I don't know if necessarily the touchdown ceiling is quite there with Godwin. That's the only thing I think. Yeah. The only difference I have with you and me for ranking him, because I have him ranked 6th, you have him ranked 5th.
How many touchdowns you got him projected at?
I have him at 7, which is still good.
Yeah, I got him at 8.
Yeah, so that's pretty much the only difference. Because I think if he had I have him 7 or 8 points behind the next guy we're going to talk about. So if he had another touchdown or 2, I'd put him ahead. But yeah, just because I think Mike Evans is still going to get a lot of work. And then Gronk's going to get a lot of work in the red zone. They still will have O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. Yep. So I still think he'll get a good amount of touchdowns. Just he might not get double digits, which would prevent him from being a top 3 wide receiver in fantasy and the tough schedule, like you said. But Brady favors the slot guy, and it's also Tom Brady over Jameis Winston, which is accuracy-wise will help the slot guy more than the outside guy as well.
Right. Very fair. Chris Godwin, I love him this year.
I like him, yeah.
DeAndre Hopkins comes in at number 6 for me and number 5 for you. Man, dude, I have Nook all the way at 11 in my projections.
You're not the only one.
And it was hard. It was hard.
I actually feel gross putting him at 5th. I'm not going to lie.
And I ranked him up, but I don't even know how I feel about that. And I don't think he's going to be a bust by any means. But
no.
I mean, he might be, considering that he's the number 4 wide receiver off the board.
Yeah.
If he ends up being a low-end wide receiver 1, he's getting picked 6 spots too early. And it's I don't dislike DeAndre Hopkins. What I don't like is the amount that the Arizona Cardinals end up throwing the football after Kyler Murray rushes it all over the field. So it's if he's going to only throw it 515 to 520 times and Hopkins is not going to get that 160, target total, that takes DeAndre Hopkins straight the hell out of, I think the top 6 for me. And it's or the top 5 for me, just because he's not going to get targeted. He's not efficient like Tyreek Hill when it comes to, receiving yards and touchdowns and all that stuff, because, obviously his quarterback is going to be Kyler Murray and was Deshaun Watson and not, Patrick Mahomes, he's the best quarterback in the NFL right now. So it's for me, when I look at DeAndre Hopkins, I have to put him at 6 because I think we need to temper our excitement a little bit with Hopkins. And I think that in that offense, yes, he's going to be the number 1 guy. Yes, he's going to get the targets, right? But I don't think that there's enough there for him to have massive success. Now, I think touchdowns is going to be the difference. Obviously right now I've projected 7 touchdowns. If he catches 10, 11, you're talking about a fantasy point increase of 24 to 30 points. And if that happens, it puts him in the top 3, which is great. But I don't know if he's going to get those 12 to 14, that 10 to 12 touchdown total.
So I think with Hopkins, I'm very nervous about him too, partly because of Odell last year. I mean, there was so much hype for Odell going on the Browns, and then he just was even worse than fantasy-wise, and a lot of people expected him to be. And so I've noticed there's a lot of people that kind of have the same feeling with Hopkins for this year. I think the difference for me, I do really believe in that Arizona offense. I believe in Cliff Kingsbury, at least as an offensive coach. Yeah. I like Kyler Murray a lot. And I think Hopkins can get 8 to 9 touchdowns, which would bring him into the top 5. But he's going to need touchdowns this year. Because I agree with you. I don't think he's going to get 160, 170 targets. I think he's probably going to get around 140 targets.
Yeah.
So he's gonna need that extra touchdown or 2 to get into the top 5 fantasy wide receivers. I think he can do it because I think that offense is going to be really good this year. Yeah. But he's a guy who could easily bust.
Oh, for sure. I think it's hard. We just on the draft guide we just finished our bust list, and I was going through that, and it was hard for the wide receiver position. I mean, there was some guys that you could peg as busts. But it's hard to touch those top receivers and be like, hey, these guys are going to completely poop themselves. And I think Hopkins is in a situation where he changes teams. It is in a high flying offense that wants to throw the football a lot. And they have a quarterback who, wants to run it, 100 times, 100 times a season. And so it's with that, if you call 600 pass plays, and he rushes it 100 times, and 80 of them are not designed runs, you're only talking about 520 actual pass attempts. And if that's the case, then Hopkins isn't going to hit that, 160, 170 total that he had last year, unless Kyler Murray targets him a lot. And so it's you just don't you still have Christian Kirk and Tyler Boyd. I mean, I'm not Tyler Boyd, Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald there, who also have to command some target share, right? And Kenyon Drake, who's going to command some target share.
Sure, yeah.
So it's you have to spread it around. And when you're talking about DeAndre Hopkins, it's hard to get him to that 160, even if I wanted to. If he does reach that point and he gets 10 touchdowns, I mean, he could easily be a top 3 wide receiver, which is why he's still going 4. But as of right now, it's unlikely for me that to happen. But he still scores 210 fantasy points. So that in and of itself is still a wide receiver 1 season, a majority of the time. Let's talk about the next guy. The next 3 guys we actually agree on.
We all understand.
Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay is at number 7 on both of our lists. I have Golladay a little bit lower at 200 fantasy points, just because he's a little less efficient when it comes to catching the football. His catch rate.
Sure.
And more specifically, last year, you would say that was probably his breakout season, right?
Yeah.
He had literally no quarterbacks throwing him the football. His catchable target rate was 74%, which is number 71 in the NFL. His true catch rate, 75%. That was just last year. In 2018, his catch rate was 77% when he had Matt Stafford throwing him the football. So, you can see a little bit of an increase in that category. But the big thing that I noticed is when I projected him, I gave him 120 targets and he came down with only 70 catches. And I think you're going to see him kind of stay in that range of 120 to 125 just because of the way he plays. He's an outside receiver that gets the ball chucked to him, similar to Tyreek Hill, you know what I mean? And he catches 80 balls. He's not a guy that's going to get you 100 catches in a season, right? But he'll get you 10 touchdowns. So that's what holds his fantasy value up. I think there's a chance Golladay could get 130 targets and catch 80 balls and go for 1,200 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns and end up in the top 5. But the more I look at Kenny Golladay and project him, I think he's capped in terms of what he can do. So I don't think he ends up being a top 3 wide receiver next year or a top 4 wide receiver. I think his highest, like if you were to say the best case scenario for Kenny Golladay, it's number 5. And so I still think he's a top 10 receiver easily, but he's back end. So especially where he's going off the board right now as I think the 10th receiver off the board, that's, a safe area to draft him.
Yeah, that's great. And people forget he actually had pretty much the same year in 2018. It really wasn't a total breakout year. The only difference was last year he finally got touchdowns.
Right.
He had 11 touchdowns in 2019, 5 in 2018, but he only had 5. He actually had 5 less catches last year than he did in 2018, and he just had a little bit more yards. His yards per reception were higher. So it was a very similar season, just more touchdowns. So I think, Golladay is an interesting player because you can make the argument that those touchdowns are going to go down with TJ Hawkinson there, and 11 touchdowns is just hard to do for any player in the league. But with Matt Stafford playing a full season, because remember he had Chase Daniel and I think Driscoll, right? Jeff Driscoll for half of the season.
Yeah. Gross.
So that's and he still ended up with 11 touchdowns. And he is he's a big body receiver. He's 6'4", 215. So he's a great red zone option along with Hawkinson. So I still think he's going to get around 9-ish touchdowns. I think I have it projected at 9. And then he can, with Matt Stafford playing a full season, you would expect his yards or even receptions just to go up a little bit, just enough to make the difference. I think he's going to have pretty much the same season he did last year, and he was a wide receiver 6 last year. So I do like Kenny Golladay. I think he's a safer bet. I think his ceiling is kind of limited, though, due to the players around him, because Marvin Jones is going to eat. I think Hawkinson's going to have a year 2 jump. Danny Amendola is still, even though fantasy-wise he's not going to do anything, he'll still get 50 catches. So it's kind of his ceiling is limited. I wouldn't draft him to expect him to be the wide receiver 1 in all fantasy, but I would draft him with the expectation he's going to be a top 10 fantasy receiver at least.
Let's move on to Juju Smith-Schuster.
Oh, I love Juju.
Oh, man. Me and you both, my friend. I was nervous that your rank was going to be lower than my rank. And then I came in and I was like, wow, you have him where I have him. Yep. I was surprised too when I checked the half PPR consensus on Fantasy Pros this morning, and it had Juju at 10. So
it's just higher than it was.
We're not alone.
He was 12.
Not alone anymore.
He's moving up, which is unfortunate because I was hoping to get him in the 5th round.
Juju right now, just because when normal people start drafting, which is starting now, his ADP in sleeper and half PPR is 49.5, which is a 4th round pick in 12 teams. So, we talk about what Juju Smith-Schuster did last year, and the thing that frustrates the heck out of me is that people look at Juju and they're like, he's just not good. It's do you forget who was throwing him the football last year? Are you that, stupid that you can't even look at the numbers and be like, oh, yeah, they didn't have a quarterback last year. Everything that we predicted for Juju in 2019 was based on Big Ben throwing him the football 165 times, right? And it's people just assumed that all of a sudden Juju was just this bad receiver, and it's no, he's still the number 1 receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's still the guy in that offense. He's going to dominate the slot like he always does. Big Ben just had shoulder surgery, so that for dang sure he's not going to be lunging it down the field too often. And I feel like you're going to see Juju get around 150 to 160 targets. And he's going to lock that down. And because of his high efficiency when it comes to reception and his good hands, he's going to get 100 catches. And it's if he ends up with 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, he's a top 6, 7 receiver. And I was being conservative with Juju Smith-Schuster. And it's
too.
I think for me, he's one of the best wide receiver values in the draft because he has all the opportunity. He's shown he can be a top 6 receiver in fantasy football before. And if he gets the target share, in an offense where he could honestly get 10 touchdowns next year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's if that happens and he hits 1,300 yards and he's more efficient than we thought he was going to be or projected him to be, he can end up being a top 5 receiver. And to get that in the 5th round, okay, I'm all right with that.
I know. I'd take him in the 3rd round. We did in our mock draft. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like I was conservative as well. I think it's almost a guarantee if Big Ben is healthy that Juju is going to get at least 150 to 160 targets. I mean, in 2018 with Antonio Brown there, Juju got 166 targets. Now he's the number one guy. I mean, you got to expect him to get around 100, at least 160. But I went low on him. I projected him with 150 targets. I only projected him at 6 touchdowns, and he still was the number 7 receiver in my projection. So if you give him like 165 to 170 targets, which I think he's capable of, and like 7, 8, 9, 10 touchdowns, I mean, he's going to finish as a top 5 wide receiver, and I think his value is great where he's going right now. I love Juju, one of my favorite players this year.
For true. Let's talk about number 9, Amari Cooper. I have him at 213 fantasy points. Where you got him?
Let me check. I have him at 210.
So, yeah, right in the same ballpark. I projected him at 130 targets. Last year, he had 120, 119 if you want to get particular. But
he didn't miss a game, right?
No, he played all 16. I think he was.
Oh, did he?
He missed some time in the game, but
he left the game in the first quarter for one game and missed the rest of the game. So he pretty much missed one game.
Okay,
but it's listed that he played all 16. So
anyway, Amari Cooper, he's a little bit tougher. I have him right now, like I said, 9 overall, and I have him at 130 targets. Who he probably would have reached that point had he played that full game. He's a very good receiver, a little bit inconsistent. I don't think he can reach into the top 4 among that crowd, but I think he's a good receiver between 9 and 6. I would say 9 and 5 maybe. So he can finish in any one of those ranges. Right now he's going off the board at pick 29, so right around the 3rd round. So it's not a bad selection. I don't think Amari Cooper is a sexy pick, though. And he kind of scares me a lot because he's good, but he's not like spectacular. You know what I mean? He's not like
but he's solid, though.
He's a solid wide receiver. He does good with the fantasy point per target. The question is, can he get above that 100? Like if he hit 150 targets, he has a good enough catch rate and the ability to, he's a great red zone target. So he would most definitely get into that top 5. But I just don't see Dallas targeting him that much with the addition of, CeeDee Lamb and having Michael Gallup still there, and finally getting rid of Jason Witten so you can actually target the tight end position now. And then you have Zeke, who you're going to throw it to 90 times. If Dak throws it, 575 times, I mean, you're starting to eat into some of his targets. I mean, some of his attempts as well. So it's like, I just don't know if Amari Cooper can reach 150 to 160 targets, but if he does, he's a great value. And I think drafting him, I always look at him and I'm like, I don't want to draft him. And then you kind of like, you got to draft him in the, in the 3rd round if you're there. Though,
because
it's not a bad pick.
Yeah. No, I mean, Dak threw the ball 596 times last year. And with Mike McCarthy, now the head coach, I think they're going to throw it like 600 times. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't projected at 605 passing attempts, I believe.
Yeah.
So if they throw the ball that much, it doesn't matter that CeeDee Lamb is there. It doesn't matter that Michael Gallup's there. Mark Cooper still can get like 130 targets. And if he does that, like, again, I don't, he's kind of like Kenny Golladay. I don't really see him being in the top 3 of fantasy wide receivers, but he's going to be consistent. He finishes the 9th receiver last year in all of fantasy. And I think he's going to be about the same. Like he's going to be a low end wide receiver 1. And just a solid week-to-week player, but I don't really see his ceiling super high because of the talent around him. But with the amount the Cowboys throw the ball and how efficient that offense is, I think Amari Cooper is still going to be very, very good.
Okay, let's talk about our last guy. We also agree on this guy, DJ Moore. We're going to stop here at 10 and not go 11 and 12. 11 and 12 for me are Thielen and Calvin Ridley. 11 and 12 for you are Cooper Kupp and Mike Evans. But let's talk about
Ridley 13 though.
Okay.
Just so it's out there.
He's like, just so you know.
I love Calvin Ridley.
So DJ Moore obviously had an interesting path to where he is now. He's at I think 135 targets last year, and the year before he had 82 targets. So he had the increase. He missed a game. Had he played full 16, I think he would have reached 145 targets. So I have him projected at, where are you, DJ Moore? 143 targets, which is, kind of where he is. But I only have him projected or statted at 6 touchdowns. And here's the big thing with DJ Moore, which is number 13 in my rankings, by the way. I mean, number 13 in my projections, by the way. So I think the biggest thing for him is that he's going to get the yardage. He's going to get the receptions. The difference is, can DJ Moore get 9, 10 touchdowns? Because if he does end up doing that, it puts him up in the conversation of wide receiver 6 or wide receiver 5, right? And I'm not sure, it depends on how good Teddy Bridgewater is throwing the football next year for the Carolina Panthers. A lot of it is predicated on that. And I think what you saw from Michael Thomas last year and the security blanket he was for Teddy Bridgewater when he was throwing the football, that makes me a little more comfortable with DJ Moore, because if he ends up targeting DJ Moore 150 times, or somewhere in that ballpark, 9 to 10 times a game, like he did Michael Thomas, you're going to see DJ Moore have some pretty explosive games. And he's going to be like, there's literally, you have Curtis Samuel there, who's not a bad option in the slot.
No,
but
at all.
I don't think there's any other weapons there that you can really look to in terms of where Teddy Bridgewater is going to throw the football besides Christian McCaffrey.
My problem is Robbie Anderson. They did sign him.
Oh yeah, that's right.
You always forget about Robbie Anderson.
Dang, dude, that freaking guy. He's the 5th wide receiver. Screw Robbie Anderson.
I don't think Robbie Anderson is going to take too much away from DJ Moore. I am DJ Moore, and I was very low on DJ Moore.
Take it up with Adam.
Adam will give you all the DJ Moore love. I was low on DJ Moore on purpose because I was very high on DJ Moore, and I was like, all right, let me
be
see
reserved.
What his floor and like a realist kind of.
That makes sense.
And I had him at 6 touchdowns, and I think it was like the same as you. I think I had him as like the 14th receiver in my projections. But I could easily see, because I think Curtis Samuel will get a couple touchdowns, but he's not a huge red zone guy. Robbie Anderson will get a couple touchdowns. Ian Thomas, the tight end, might get 2 or 3 touchdowns. McCaffrey will get 3 or 4 touchdowns. That still leaves, like, if Teddy Bridgewater has like 24, 25 touchdown passes, that still leaves about like 8-ish touchdowns for DJ Moore. Yeah. If he gets 8 touchdowns, which I think will probably be where he ends up with, he's going to finish as like the 9th or 10th receiver in fantasy, and he's got the upside to surpass a guy like Kenny Golladay or Amari Cooper.
Yeah, very true. That will do it for our wide receiver rankings. If you would like to get the full 100 wide receivers that we spent hours ranking, be sure to buy our draft guide. Launches tomorrow. Check our website, thefantasychampions.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and we'll talk to you Thursday, Fantasy Champs.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions Podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.